What happens in movies that isn't realistic? Story 1. Digging a grave. Soil is much harder than what movies pretend. I'm an archaeologist. I dig square holes for a living. I can confirm that digging square holes is a skill you have to learn and practice. No one does it right the first or even the 20th time they do it. Also, we don't do it freehand. We have stakes at the corners, and sometimes string to keep those edges straight. B. Takes a long time. Dirt is hard and heavy, and it gets harder to get out of the hole the deeper you go. C. You would not be clean and dry at the end of digging that far down, period. Graves in media are always neat with well-compacted but also loose, dry dirt and no tree roots running through them, no matter how old the grave is. The wooden coffin is still intact enough to walk on without collapsing. There are no concrete vaults. Bodies are often dried, mummy-looking things in movies instead of runny globs of corpse wax. Also, we're not allowed to dig holes past 1.2 meters deep, period, in case they collapse. That never happens in movies either. This is why I like the hole digging scene in Breaking Bad, when Walt is burying his money. Not only does he bring a pickaxe to help break up the hard ground, it takes him all day to dig one big enough for his barrels. Even that is questionable to me. Walt was 50 years old and had recently gone through chemo treatments. Even digging in the yard to plant flowers can be draining, so a bunch of 55-gallon drums would be excruciating. Story 2. Ripping out your IV is a terrible idea. When they've been in a coma for like 6 months and they are just able to jump up like their legs are just ready to work again. This happened while I was at the hospital visiting someone. I was waiting for an elevator and a guy came stumbling down the hall, dots of blood trailing behind him. He ripped out his IV and took off, stole my elevator and vanished. I have experience with somebody being in a coma. It's totally incapacitating and requires rehab if the coma is long enough. The longer you are lying still, the more the muscles atrophy and the harder you have to work to get movement back. That and no pulling out IVs. That doesn't happen without consequences. Story 3. Treating wounds. If you get stabbed in the abdomen, you're not all better just because someone stitches up your skin. Same with gunshots. Movies act like nothing important is under the skin. You've probably cut or nicked organs or nerves and are suffering internal bleeding and intense pain. And you've had foreign microbes introduced via the knife. Hello, sepsis. But to further add to what you mentioned, internal bleeding is absolutely a possibility. So it's vital to control the bleeding, even if it means doing a trauma wound packing, and keep the wound as clean as possible. As for the pain, well, it typically depends on the depth of the wound in certain spots because once the nerve endings are severed, you don't feel anything at all. Symptoms for an internal bleed vary by location and mechanism of injury. The scenes where they take the bullet out in movies, the person in the movie is usually alive and for some reason not bleeding out from the gunshot wound. Probably in 99% of cases, you are not going to take a bullet out of someone in a non-surgery setting. To tell the truth, there's only so much they can show without causing emotional harm and risking a rating that would limit the audience, so I can't really blame them for this one. Story 4. Carrying an unconscious person. Found out the hard way when my wife was sick and fainted. An unconscious body is surprisingly limp and slippery. Try to lift them by the armpits? Nope, that just makes the arms flail and they'll slip right through your fingers. Try to lift them from under the knees and around the back? Nope, their back won't stay stiff enough and their ass will just sink to the floor. Not to mention their head is rolling around the whole time. I had a girlfriend pass out from low sugar once. She had dropped a glass trying to drink some juice and then fell on the shards. I had to pull glass out of her butt cheek. Anyways, she was little. I am big. The adrenaline rush and our sizes made it possible to pick her up and carry her for a few seconds, but I tried to carry her again another time when she was a drunk mess and found out where the term dead weight came from. This is why one of the counterintuitive pieces of advice if someone stronger than you is trying to force you to go somewhere you don't want to go is to simply go entirely limp instead of trying to fight back. The reason why is that a 150-pound limp sack of meat is a hell of a lot harder to move around than a 150 rigid board. Pretty much the only way to do well is the fireman's carry, which incidentally puts the carrying person at a large disadvantage in terms of protecting their face from the would-be victim. I think I can understand this one too. It would take a lot of extra explanation and extra characters if one character isn't able to handle a body by themselves. Story 5. Hacking. Can you imagine the real thing? 20 minutes of typing? Okay, it looks like they're running this program and I exploited this vulnerability to get in. So you can get the info we need now? What? No, all I did was access the janitor's login account. Now I need to find a few more vulnerabilities to get a higher level account. Oh, and then you can get us the info we need. No, that's not on this system. You aren't even hacking the right system? I need this one to use in an attack on a later system. That one will let me change the tech support information to call me instead of their normal tech support. Then they will give me the info I need to put on a keyboard logger on their system, which will give me access. Then will you have the info? No, then I can again work my way up to a better account that has the info. How long will that take? A few months. I'll let you know when I'm in. As someone who works in IT, I think the popular image of the hacker has created an unrealistic expectation about what we can do. People think we can just write a couple lines of code and fix all their issues in a few minutes without having to interrupt their workflows. I always knew there was more to it than that. I didn't know exactly what. I just knew it had to be more, otherwise everybody would be doing it. Story 6. Working in an office. I really question whether a screenwriter or director has worked a regular 9-to-5 office job a day in their lives. This is why every movie or show the office worker is getting ready for the big meeting. It's because a lot of screenwriting is pitching a movie script to unreceptive producers or pitching story ideas to the showrunner of a TV show. The screenwriters are just writing what their job is like. Most office jobs, if a meeting went bad, we would have to have another meeting later that people prepared better for because the work still needs to get done. Yeah, I can think of worse things. Free coffee, right? I know that's what keeps me going, though I really, truly do hate the useless, never-ending meetings. The reality is like half the day in an office is either getting the printer to work or trying to find someone who can. So I guess it's fair that Hollywood wouldn't really find much value in dramatizing the reality, though I do tend to think they don't actually recognize it as well. Others brought up that office space, and to a smaller degree, the office, are more representative of actual office work. There's a lot of humdrum and fixing of equipment, usually involving calling in technicians and waiting for them to come in. If it's a network problem, you sit around and twiddle your thumbs because the entire job is on the computer. At least mine was. About 99% of the drama was between coworkers because they didn't get along. We didn't even get free coffee. Where's Milton when you need him? Story 7. Car accidents. People don't just lightly bleed from their heads then die. They are some of the goriest, most traumatic deaths I've seen outside of combat footage. They come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes that's exactly what happens, with enough internal bleeding. Some people die in car crashes with not so much visible damage. Exactly what happened in the last accident I tended to. Some people get gruesome injuries that mostly end up being superficial and end up recovering fully, so it's not entirely unrealistic. I'm a paramedic. One reason why I never ever and advocate against shame or give a hard time to anyone who bypasses an accident scene, without question dial 911. Even if you see others there and on the phone, call. Sometimes they won't have a signal. Sometimes they're not actually calling 911, etc. Call and report. If the dispatcher says they know, then hang up. Trust me, dispatchers would rather have multiple calls than not know from someone ignoring it. But if you aren't prepared physically and mentally to provide assistance, don't. Move along. You, inexperienced, and the most gruesome thing you've ever seen is someone getting hit in the crotch on America's Funniest Home Videos, is going to rock up and give medical aid. You, who will then live with a lifelong impression and trauma of walking up to a driver's door and seeing a child begging their mother to wake up? No. Go. Leave. Another story, there was a car on its side in a ditch. We responded, obviously. We got there and everyone had gotten out and was fine. Some glass scrapes, but that was it. So we left. 2 minutes later, we got rerouted with a med flight inbound. What did we miss? Was there another patient we didn't know about? Nope. A Samaritan stopped to help. No big deal. Driver wanted to get their phone and wallet before the car got towed so they could call their wife and let them know they'd be late. So they rightly assumed the accident scene was unsafe with the car on its side. True, they decided to push it onto its wheels. Car rocked back and severely injured both of Samaritan's legs. Long story short, never ever shame someone for not stopping to render aid. I respect people who recognize their limits and capabilities and avoid the situation. This went in a direction I didn't intend, but given all the comments about gruesome gruesome injuries, I think it's the best thing to add. I feel uneasy having just read them. I don't know what it would be like actually seeing these things, so if you see injuries in the movies and you think you can handle helping someone in a real wreck, you might be wrong. Also, there was a story about an accident where the driver yelled that they needed to find their baby. Turns out the entire car seat had flown through the windshield and bounced a distance from the car. The child was fine, just some cuts and scrapes. Car seats are lifesavers, quite literally. Just felt like tossing in some public service announcements. As the sergeant said on Hill Street Blues, let's be careful out there. Story 8. Getting shot is not a flesh wound. Oh, you're fine. It went through your body. But if it doesn't, it has to be dug out right away. But once it's out, apparently the hole can be taped shut and everything's fine. Also, the bullet removed has to be dropped into a shallow metal bowl that apparently everyone has, so it can make a tink sound. Can't be tossed on the floor or in a half-empty coffee cup. No, we require that tink. This reminds me of Tom Waits in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. We laughed when he said it went through. He'd be fine. I guess it's to show how tough he is and to make us wonder if he really will die from gangrene or blood loss. He can't though, right? I mean, it's Tom Waits. Our cats have small, shallow metal food bowls. Now I'm going to think of bullets and Tom Waits when I feed them. Story 9. Teachers or people with low-paying jobs owning or renting massive houses or apartments. A cook and a cafe waitress being able to afford a 2-bedroom flat in Manhattan was the funniest part of Friends to me. This is the #1 thing I notice by far is how nice of places there are in nearly all movies and TV shows. It's ridiculous, and if they do show squalor, it's super squalor. It's so rare they show actual average homes in the 1,000 square foot range. That's what I thought when we watched the first Chucky with my husband. This single mother teacher affording a huge apartment in the middle of the city. Then my husband explained that the US economy actually allowed that back then and that it's just crap now. All of this is true. On Friends, they did try to explain the financial discrepancy by saying it was a rent-controlled apartment from when Monica's grandmother started renting it, and she was subletting it against the rules. Someone brought up that cameras can't really move about, and there can't be much space for actors to move if it's a tiny space, which is something I hadn't thought of. At least, the bedrooms in Friends were tiny. That's more believable. Story 10. Going through glass. That is dangerous as hell. Potential major lacerations every time. Speaking from my experience as well as 2 others. Anytime I see this in a movie, I'm reminded of the time a guy tried to break into my old job. He busted out a window and slid through it on his stomach. It went about as well as you'd think. The dude ended up calling 911 because he cut his stomach and was bleeding heavily. Window and door glass shop worker here. Untempered glass meant for windows is 3mm to 4mm thick and is terrifyingly sharp when broken. My boss nearly got killed a few years ago when he was lifting a sheet and it lacerated his forearm, and this is just an accident. If someone jumped through the sheets deliberately, I'm pretty sure they're dying from blood loss within moments. I'm going to add breaking mirrors to this one. I can think of 3 movies or TV shows where a mirror was broken on purpose, usually by punching it with fists. I know it's not the same as going all the way through glass, but it's still pieces of glass flying around cutting them up. The potential for damage is there. I can see maybe if the writers need to convey an attribute, let's say anger, by doing something visually identifiable and quick like punching a mirror, but they don't have time or there isn't room in the story for that character to have a realistic conclusion for it, going to the hospital because they're bleeding. Story 11. Breakfast in America. The mom makes a big spread with pancakes, bacon, and eggs and all that stuff just for someone to pick up a slice of toast and rush off. I'd be super angry. Also, everyone is all dressed and ready for the day. This seems to always be on a school day. Both of my parents had to be at work at the same time. I had to catch the bus. They were trying to pack their/my lunch and get my younger sibling ready while I had a bagel on a paper towel. I don't blame them. The mom always makes an absurd amount of food for a family of 3 or 4 on a weekday. I can't imagine eating a pancake, eggs, bacon, orange juice, and hash browns at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, and then be able to stay conscious for my first class of the day. I never once had a big breakfast on a weekday, even into adulthood, unless I was on vacation. Even then, it was usually at a restaurant. My stomach is as awake as my brain is, so I eat more later in the day. Story 12. Basically everything about guns. Drywall and furniture don't stop bullets. Reloading is a thing. Please stop cocking your weapon to look cool. Half of your rounds are on the ground. And so many more. For those who don't know, silencers typically reduce the volume of gunshots by 30 to 40 decibels. Gunshots are typically 160 plus decibels, louder indoors due to the reverb. So at best, firing a gun indoors will be about 130 decibels with a silencer. An ambulance siren is 120 decibels for comparison. Heat did a pretty good job at showing actual effects of gunfire, like hearing loss after firing. No wonder why Michael Mann is a shooting instructor among other things. In that movie, gunshots are more of a general overwhelming noise than a directed identifiable bang, and this is more or less what it sounds like in real life, minus obviously the 5 minutes of ringing following it, and with some weapons, the vibrations that you can feel inside your skull. Let's shoot a bad guy in the next car from the passenger seat while the gun is in front of the driver's face. Definitely won't get blinded or rupture their eardrums doing that. I'm no gun expert, so I didn't know a silencer is not actually silent. It's always portrayed as a little metal pfft sound that could easily be missed. I did know that shooting can give you hearing damage because I know people who would go to shooting ranges before hearing protection was even considered important, and now they have hearing aids. Story 13. Getting hit in the head. No, John, you won't wake up with a minor headache 10 minutes later, you'll wake up a decade later with a wheelchair. I got mugged in the 90s, got hit in the head with a pipe, was in a coma for 3 days. Long story short, I spent 6 months in physical therapy for a bunch of leg weakness / balance issues that I had, and a year of speech therapy. Also caused some personality changes / anger management issues for years afterwards. For real, man, I got knocked out at a bar by some jerk who thought I was trying to fight him when I was de-escalating the situation. Broke a bunch of bones in my face too. I should have gone to the hospital and gotten a police report, but drunk friends just drove me out of there. Basically suggested I walk it off because everybody gets in fights. These things happen. Be a man. Wasn't until the next day when I was sober when I realized how dangerous that was. Bad hangover. Big hospital bill following. No lawsuit against the guy to pay for it. Changed the way I go through life. I'm a lot more careful now, but thankfully not too messed up from it. I was lucky. You know what always bugged me? When Ron Weasley hits Gilderoy Lockhart in the head to knock him out after he's already lost his memory and doesn't know what's going on in the Chamber of Secrets. He's not even a threat anymore, but he knocks him out. Maybe the spell backfiring caused a temporary loss of memory, but the beating caused it to be permanent. Did you ever think of that? I know there's a lot more reality issues than that, but it always irritated me because it was unnecessary. Ron's not a violent sort. Story 14. CPR. It's that trope that casualties in the movies always come around at the very point during CPR that the other characters are all giving up on them surviving. The chances of someone recovering from chest compressions and breaths alone are very slim. It's the critical intervention of a defibrillator that gives the casualty the greatest chance of survival. I thought for sure this would be the top answer. Also, you can't just defib anybody. A completely stopped heart can't be shocked back to life. Chest compressions do that, and if you do get a pulse back, the person is more than likely still going to be unconscious. They don't just pop back up ready to walk around. I've been doing CPR on practice mannequins as being a part of a volunteer paramedic for years. Absolutely exhausting when needing to do it for 10 to 15 minutes, but then I went to a conference where they had a gauge on the mannequin to show if your compressions were actually effective. Right rhythm, but also the right depth. 2 minutes of doing effective CPR and I was barely able to ask my partner to swap. It was horrendous. I thank the entire universe that I have never had to perform real CPR on a human. I was surprised when I first learned that CPR is a last chance effort and is rarely successful. In the movies, especially older ones, successful and dramatic CPR is pretty common. Now when I see it in a show, I'm convinced it's not going to work. With the advent and availability of the portable defibrillator, it seems more likely for people to survive these heart attacks. Story 15. Sharks. Movies make you think they are bloodthirsty man-eaters who kill humans for sport. Although they aren't 100% harmless, most sharks don't actually like the taste of humans and will spit it out. They also often say shark-infested waters, which is like saying human-infested buildings. It makes me angry to no end how wrong they are about portraying sharks in movies. Randy Feltface comes to mind. You know, when the shark eats people, it's messed up, but it gets me how they immediately go out and kill the shark. Like, oh, it's gone rogue. It's gone rogue? No, it hasn't. It's just doing what millions of years of evolution has programmed it to do. Swim around eating stuff. Yeah, but it came into our bit. This bit's our bit of the ocean. See that bit there? That big wet bit? That's its bit. This bit here, all this dry bit that you're standing on with your legs that have evolved to stand on the dry bit, that's your bit. You go into its bit, you're gonna get bit. That's the lesson of this story. Animals in general. I grew up with an alligator under my bed and rattlesnakes in the basement. Wild caught, domestic bred, didn't matter. Snakes don't bite you for fun. You gotta mess up badly to get bit. Alligators in the wild know you're dangerous. Don't go play with them by any means, but they won't hunt you down unless they're desperate and you're injured. Don't even get me started on bugs. Wasps and bees are about as hostile as a brick if you just mind your own business. I love the phrase human-infested buildings. It gives a great mental image and gets its point across. I enjoy this quote as well because it's true that we are living in the same places as these wild animals and expect that they're ruthless, but they're just doing their own thing. I was appalled when our poodle killed a mouse in our house because this little dog is fearful of lightning and the sound of a fork scraping against a plate, but she went feral on that mouse. It's her nature. Story 16. Wedding cake tasting. My fiance and I recently went and she expected it to be like in the movies where you would get a bunch of different slices to try. Instead, we got a taste of the pastry for the vanilla cake and little plastic cups of what the layers would be, and we had to mix and match everything ourselves to pick what we wanted. The whole time she kept telling me that this isn't what she was promised by rom-coms. Then that's gonna be a very expensive cake. You'll pay for the 10 test cakes one way or the other. Source, I'm a chef. Couldn't you just hold a monthly or quarterly event for people to do tastings for wedding cakes? Make like 10 cakes that are significantly smaller and have all the people that want to taste them come at the same time and charge like $5 to $10, scale to cover cost, ahead. Obviously, you would also skip 95% of the decorating. That's what pictures are for. This is just for taste. Then the 10 to 20 groups that want to taste them have options. I've never had this problem, and maybe I don't watch wedding videos, but this is the most lighthearted response in this thread. The cake tasting event sounds like a great idea. I would probably go to that just for fun. I mean, it's cake. Story 17. When a detective is inspecting a dead person's phone and they have a photo of themselves as the background. Thanks, Captain Obvious, for letting us know whose phone it is. Also, the tendency in Hollywood for everyone's phone wallpapers to be a professionally taken photo of them with the rest of their friends or family. No one ever has a poorly taken photo, which is common since not everyone is a professional photographer, and no one ever has anything else like a forest or space or artwork or etc. I tend bar and get to see a lot of people's phone screens. You might be surprised how many folks, especially younger women, have a selfie as their home/lock screen. My lock screen is one of our pets. I change it every once in a while to a different pet. I can understand having a group picture or a bunch of friends or a significant event, or maybe people with selfies as their lock screen are always losing their phones and have to prove it does belong to them. Story 18. Pointing at a girl in a bar and saying, "You see that girl? I'm going to marry her someday," and then somehow doing so. Not to be that person, but this actually was the story of my grandmother and grandfather. He came home and bet his sister money that he was going to marry the girl he'd met at the dance that night. 7 kids and 40-some years later, he died with the bill he'd won still in his wallet. It was the best story. He carried it, then she did, until she passed 20 years later. We buried her with the dollar. Likewise, my grandfather and grandmother. All the stories I'd heard were second and third hand, but my grandmother grew up in the 1930s Germany in a village that was in Poland prior to World War I and is today again, and my grandfather was in the US Army. The story went that on patrol outside of Munich, sometime in 1945, my grandfather along with some of the guys from his unit ran into my grandmother with some friends walking, and he allegedly pointed her out and told his buddy basically that. And he did in fact end up marrying her and bringing her back to the States a few years later. So it does happen, and it's really sweet, but it is rare. I want to know about the percentage of people who say it that it doesn't happen, or it's a stalker type situation. Not that I'm a pessimist or anything. Story 19. Prison. Most people are just trying to do their time and not let the time do them. There are fights, but probably no more or less than high school. You got a bunch of guys living together with no women, except for like nurses, so sometimes the testosterone spills over. Mostly these guys just ask for forms, paper, and envelopes to write letters or hygiene products, mostly TP. Movies and TV only show you the bad stuff. As far as the officers beating a guy up for stepping out of line, I can't speak for all of of them, but the ones I've seen have cameras covering literally everywhere. It might happen, but if it did, the inmate would have a lawsuit and the officer would be out of a job. They'd have multiple angles of the assault on camera shown in court. Inmate jumps on you, green light, but just hauling off and hitting him because you can, no can do. Also, they outnumber staff 10 to 1, so why do that in the first place? Besides, they're people too. We don't give them personal information, but we do BS with them. Whatever sport is currently airing is a popular topic of discussion. You want to be able to talk to these guys? Pay at least minimal attention to sports. Aside from religion, it's the only language they know. They gotta live there and staff gotta work there, so you gotta find a way to get along. You gotta find common ground. This constant warfare they portray in the movies just ain't real life. I used to work in a department where I was the only guy. It was practically an unwritten rule that I had to keep up with all the local sports for when guys from other departments or sales representatives, etc. would come around. And if I knew someone was coming in from another area, I had to look up what their sports teams were doing, at least to a surface level. When a compliance inspector showed up early and my boss was still in a meeting, me talking to him about the Giants for 10 minutes really made things go more smoothly. Jails and prisons are completely different animals. Prisons are long-term housing. Jails pick people right up off the street. I've seen girls in jail and they looked like they'd do anything I wanted, if they thought I could get them out. And to be absolutely clear, I had no intention of doing that. That was just the vibe I got. I was so glad to be out of that place. Anyway, I imagine older facilities that aren't set up for a lot of electronics have a harder time getting the kind of camera setups I've seen. But a lot of those places are being dismantled, replaced with newer facilities. Guess it depends where you're at. This reminds me of Paul Edgecombe from The Green Mile, Tom Hanks' character. He said to just keep things quiet. The prisoners are under enough stress that they could get riled up and cause trouble. That movie and Shawshank Redemption are the only prison movies I've watched, and they are set at least 50 years ago. Story 20. Romance. No 16-year-old me, not all boys are 6-foot+ supermodels with abs, a chiseled jawline, and no acne, and they certainly won't just randomly show up at your door with a smirk and hang out with you even though you have nothing in common until he suddenly falls in love with you. Even if you date the guy, you certainly won't not fight at times, and lastly, you probably won't even last all throughout high school and college and get married because you'll both change and go through different situations. You'll probably break up and date a dozen other guys before you finally settle with someone who looks nothing like the tall, handsome guy you wanted, but at least he'll have an interesting personality and make you genuinely happy. In movies, the ugly girl is a supermodel tier babe with bad glasses, fashion, haircut, makeup, etc. A quick fix for those things by taking off the glasses, go shopping for a new outfit, get a new hairdo and new makeup, and she's smoking hot. Everybody wants her. In the movies, they always show makeup-clad women with perfectly done hair in the perfect posture and expect me to find that attractive. No, I want to see my perfectly imperfect girl burp like a gorilla after she eats the breakfast I brought her in bed, with her hair all frizzy while acting spoiled. Nice change from being all working class professional and uptight all the time. There's just something about someone willing to be that vulnerable and talkative and open with me that's so sexy. I don't know if I make sense. First of all, yes, that makes perfect sense because you're seeing your partner in a way that no one else sees. It's a form of intimacy, all its own. As for romance movies, it's enlightening to look at movies of different eras to see what they thought at that time was romantic. Some of it now seems at best over the top, at worst stalkerish. As for the happily ever after disappointment when a romance or relationship does end, I like to quote this one: "I did not know what love was until I knew what love wasn't. Live and learn." Story 21. Mental health issues. You mean autism doesn't give you superpowers? My superpower is to talk too much about fishing, but my real superpower is remembering to cut myself off and apologize when I realize it's happening again. Also, therapy. Movies and TV had unconsciously conditioned me to think that you just had one buried trauma. Once you recover that memory, you cry hysterically for a few minutes, then you're fine. It was a rude awakening to learn that I was supposed to do a pile of outside reading and examine my everyday thoughts for years. Also, the ridiculous idea that any woman can develop a split personality as easily as catching a cold, then she'll start acting like a hooker part of the time. This was more of an 80s soap opera thing than a movie one, but it scared the hell out of me as a kid. Ironically, my childhood was damn near the sort that can cause dissociative identity disorder in reality. Therapy is much more slow and tedious than it is shown to be. There can be moments of insight and understanding, but a good therapist will bring you along to your own own conclusions. A therapist doesn't just listen to you and bark a diagnosis at you, they're more of a guide, and you have work to do. The way mental health is represented in all media seems to be a generalized mess. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of issue. Just because someone likes things to be neat doesn't mean they're OCD. Just because someone is acting selfish doesn't mean they're a narcissist. There are also situations of multiple diagnoses. Autism and ADHD are often co-occurring, and their traits can overlap. It's hard to distinguish them. Someone can have PTSD from how they're treated because of their other mental illnesses. It's so complex. In all these situations, the reality is much more difficult to represent on screen, given how much time there is to tell the stories and our own attention spans. People probably would lose interest in the depth of details. Thank you so much for watching to the end. If you have a similar story or example that you would like to share, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and these stories, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.